He was a duke, bound by a terrible secret that had stolen his voice. She was the bride he was forced to marry, a prisoner in his fortress of silence. He never spoke a single word to her, not at their cold wedding, not after the single, duty-bound night they shared, and not even when he learned she carried his heir. The silence of Blackwood Manor was absolute, broken only by the wind and the ticking of clocks. But one night, a new sound broke through the darkness, a woman's soft lullaby sung to an unborn child, and the Duke, the man who had vowed never to speak again, finally whispered her name. The carriage wheels striking the gravel of Blackwood Manor sounded like stones being tossed onto a coffin. Seraphina Hastings pressed her hands against the cold glass, peering out at the imposing silhouette of her new home. It was less a house and more a fortress of grey stone, its Gothic spires seeming to pierce the bruised twilight sky. It was a place where light came to die. She was now Seraphina, Duchess of Blackwood. The title felt like a costume she was forced to wear, heavy and ill-fitting. Her marriage, arranged and executed within a fortnight, had been the talk of the London season, though only in hushed, pitying whispers. Her father, Baron Hastings, a kind man with a disastrous affinity for bad investments, had been ruined. The debt was astronomical, the threat of debtor's prison not a threat, but a certainty. Then the offer had come, not from a banker, but from the solicitors of Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood. The Duke would settle all of the Hastings debts, effective immediately. In return, he required a bride. The conditions were stark. The bride must be of good lineage, unquestionable reputation, and sound health. Seraphina at 20 was all of those things, but it was the final, unspoken condition that chilled her. Alistair, the 12th Duke of Blackwood, did not speak. Not a word. Not in years. The gossips said he was mute, driven mad by grief. Others said he was cursed. Her father, shame-faced, had told her. They say it was a fire, his first wife, and his son. He never spoke again. Seraphina had agreed. What choice did she have? She would be the lamb, sacrificed to save her family. The wedding had been a grotesque parody. It was held in the Duke's private chapel, attended only by her parents and his solicitor. Alistair was a striking man, not the monster she had envisioned. He was tall, with a severe, handsome face that looked carved from marble. His eyes, a deep storm grey, were the only living part of him. They were filled with a pain so profound it was almost terrifying. He had not looked at her. He had not said, "I do." He had merely inclined his head. The priest, sweating, had hurried through the vows, and just like that, she was bound to a ghost. Their wedding night was the new, refined definition of horror. She had sat, brittle with fear, in the cavernous, cold bedroom. He had entered, and the silence was an active, pressing force. He did not look at her face, but his gaze was heavy. He'd performed his duty as a husband with a kind of desperate, silent efficiency that was almost more brutal than cruelty. It was the detached, functional coupling of two people obligated to produce an heir. She had turned her face into the pillow, refusing to cry. It was a bargain, she reminded herself. This was the price. But in the darkness, she had felt one strange, human moment. A calloused thumb had brushed just once against the damp skin of her cheek. It was not tender, precisely, but it was aware. Then he was gone, retreating to his own wing of the manor, and she was left alone. That was 6 weeks ago. He had not entered her rooms since. He had not spoken to her. He had not even looked at her. They saw each other only at dinner. These meals were agonizing. They sat at opposite ends of a 30-foot mahogany table in a dining hall that could have seated 100. The only sounds were the scrape of silver on porcelain and the soft footsteps of the servants. The housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Croft, ran the estate with an iron fist. She was polite to Seraphina, but with a coldness that mirrored her master's. "The Duke prefers silence, Your Grace," Mrs. Croft had informed her on the first day. "The staff is instructed not to speak unless addressed. You will find it peaceful here." Peaceful was not the word. It was suffocating. Seraphina was a prisoner, a well-dressed, well-fed, titled prisoner. She spent her days wandering the cavernous, dust-sheeted halls, reading in the colossal library, or walking the overgrown, neglected gardens. She wrote letters to her family, bright, false letters about the beauty of the countryside and the quiet dignity of her husband. She could not tell them the truth, that she was dying of loneliness. Alistair was a shadow. She would see him riding out on a black stallion at dawn, a powerful, dark figure against the mist. Or she would see him in his study, the door always ajar, staring into the fireplace for hours. He was a man hollowed out by his past. And now, something new. Something terrible and wonderful. For the past week, she had been ill in the mornings. A peculiar, hopeful dread had been growing in her heart. This morning, it was confirmed. The local physician, a kind, elderly man named Dr. Miles, had been summoned. He had examined her with gentle hands. "Well, Your Grace," he'd said, his eyes kind, "you will not be lonely for much longer. You are with child." The words had landed like a stone. An heir. The one thing she was purchased to provide. That evening, she dressed for dinner with trembling hands. She had to tell him. But how? How did you communicate the most intimate news a husband and wife can share to a man who refused to acknowledge your existence? She entered the dining room. He was already there, a silhouette against the fading light, staring out the window. He turned as she entered, his grey eyes sweeping over her and finding the wall just beyond. He took his seat. The soup was served. The silence stretched. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't do it. She couldn't just blurt it out to his averted gaze. Mrs. Croft entered the room. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" she asked Alistair, who simply raised a hand, a gesture of dismissal. "Mrs. Croft, wait," Seraphina said. Her voice, unused for hours, was hoarse. Both the housekeeper and the Duke looked at her. The Duke's expression was not curious, merely annoyed by the interruption. "You may inform His Grace," Seraphina said, her voice gaining strength, "that I saw Dr. Miles today. I am with child. The Blackwood line will have its heir." She delivered the news like a general reporting on troop movements. Mrs. Croft's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She turned to the Duke. Alistair had not moved, not a muscle. His face remained a mask of cold indifference. For a terrible, humiliating moment, Seraphina thought he hadn't heard. Then, very slowly, he placed his napkin on the table. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly in the silent room. He did not look at her. He simply turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Seraphina alone at the vast table, with the news of their child echoing in the empty, oppressive air. The days that followed the announcement were, if possible, even more isolating. Seraphina had expected something, a nod, a gesture, perhaps even a note left on her breakfast tray. She received nothing. The Duke's routine was unchanged. He rode at dawn, worked in his study, and sat opposite her at dinner in perfect, agonizing silence. He had received the news of his heir as if she had commented on the weather. Her pregnancy, however, began to change her. It was a secret, living thing, a small spark of warmth in the cold manor. It was hers. It was not the Duke's, not Mrs. Croft's, not the Blackwood legacies. It was a person, a tiny forming heart that beat only for her. She stopped wandering the house like a ghost and began a mission. She would not bring her child into this cold, silent world. She had to find a space for them. She found it on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long, unused gallery, a nursery. It was a large, bright room with a southern exposure, the dust sheets on the furniture like sleeping shrouds. It was perfect. "Mrs. Croft," Seraphina announced one morning, "I wish to have the south nursery aired and cleaned. I will be furnishing it." Mrs. Croft stiffened. "Your Grace, that is not the primary nursery." "It is the one I have chosen," Seraphina said, finding a new steel in her voice. Motherhood was already making her a warrior. "As you wish, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, but her lips were pressed into a thin, white line. The cleaning commenced, and as the dust sheets were pulled away, Seraphina saw why the room had been ignored. It was old. The furniture was from a different era, a heavy, dark wood cradle, a rocking horse with one eye missing. It was a room full of forgotten things. Seraphina set to work. She sent for catalogues from London. She ordered new paint, a soft, buttery yellow. She commissioned a new crib, a changing table, and thick, soft rugs. She wanted light. She wanted life. As she worked, she felt eyes on her. She would turn, and the Duke would be there, standing at the far end of the hall, watching her. He never approached. He just watched. His expression was unreadable. Was it anger? Sadness? Or simple, cold observation? When she met his gaze, he would turn and vanish. One afternoon, a wagon arrived from the local village with the new wallpaper she had ordered. It was covered in cheerful, hand-painted birds. As she was instructing the workmen, a new figure appeared in the drive. A handsome, fashionably dressed man dismounted from a fine chestnut horse. He strode into the hall, dusting his coat, and smiled brightly at her. He had a charming, easy smile, but his eyes were sharp. "You must be the new Duchess," he said, bowing low. The silent angel brought in to save the day. "I am Julian, Lord Blackwood, Alistair's cousin." Seraphina curtsied. "Lord Blackwood, I was not aware we were expecting you." "Oh, I never wait for an invitation," Julian said, his eyes flicking past her to the workmen. "Family, you understand. I come and go as I please, or at least as I used to. Alistair has become reclusive." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me, has he said hello yet?" Seraphina flushed. "The Duke is quiet." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Quiet, that's a good one. He's a mausoleum, my dear. We all thought this marriage was a farce." But his eyes dropped pointedly to her still flat stomach. "I hear congratulations are in order. You've managed the one thing he was willing to break his silence for, eh? Duty." "If you will excuse me, Lord Julian," Seraphina said, her voice cold. "Oh, but I've come to see him," Julian said, gesturing toward the study. He walked past her and, without knocking, pushed open the heavy oak door. Seraphina couldn't help but follow, stopping at the threshold. Alistair was at his desk, head bent over a ledger. He looked up, and his face, upon seeing his cousin, hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. "Alistair, cousin!" Julian boomed, spreading his arms. "You look well. Brooding suits you. I see you've been busy. A new wife, an heir on the way. You've stolen my inheritance, you rogue." He laughed, but there was a venomous edge to it. Alistair did not move. He simply stared at Julian. The silence in the room became heavy, weaponized. "Oh, still the silent treatment," Julian sneered. "Very well. I suppose you are wondering why I'm here. Simple. I'm broke. Utterly. Those damned horses at Ascot. I need a loan, a significant one, for family. Alistair slowly reached for a piece of parchment. He dipped his pen in the inkwell and wrote a single word. No. He pushed the parchment across the desk. Julian's charming facade cracked, his face contorted in a flash of rage. No. After everything my father did for yours. You sit here in this tomb, with all this wealth, and you say no to me. Alistair met his gaze, his grey eyes as cold and hard as flint. Julian stared him down for a long moment, then let out a sharp, forced laugh. Fine. Be that way. But mark my words, Alistair. You can't hide in here forever. You and your new family. He spat the word. He turned, his eyes landing on Seraphina in the doorway. He gave her a look that was both pitying and predatory. Good luck, Your Grace, he whispered as he passed her. You'll need it. Seraphina was left standing in the doorway, staring at her husband. He was still looking at the parchment with the word no on it. For the first time, she hadn't seen a man consumed by grief. She had seen a man of immense, cold power. That night, she had a terrible dream. She dreamt of a fire. She was trapped in a room, and the smoke was thick. But it wasn't a room she recognized. It was a nursery, but not the one she was building. It was the one down the hall. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. The dream had felt real. Too real. Driven by a morbid, inexplicable curiosity, she lit a candle. She slipped out of her room and padded down the cold, moonlit corridor. She passed the south nursery, her bright, hopeful room, and continued on. She stopped at the end of the hall. The West Wing. Mrs. Croft had been explicit. The West Wing is closed, Your Grace. By the Duke's orders. It is unsafe. But her dream had been so vivid. She tried the handle on the large double doors. Locked, of course. But as she pushed, one of the doors gave way slightly. The lock was old, the wood warped. She slipped inside. The air was different, stale, cold, and thick with the smell of old smoke. The moonlight streamed through a large, boarded-up window, illuminating a scene of preserved devastation. This had been the main nursery. The walls were black with soot. A grand cradle was overturned, its rockers charred. A mobile of wooden birds hung, blackened, from the ceiling. This was where it happened. This was where his first wife, Isabella, and his son, Arthur, had died. She stepped further in, her hand over her mouth. She saw a small, soot-covered rocking horse. It was identical to the one in her nursery, the one with the missing eye. This was its twin. She suddenly understood Mrs. Croft's reaction. She had, completely by accident, chosen to build her new nursery as a mirror image of the one that had been destroyed. "Get out!" The voice was not a voice. It was a rasp. A sound torn from a throat, raw with disuse and fury. Seraphina screamed, dropping her candle, plunging the room into near blackness. Alistair was there, a dark shadow in the doorway. He was just a shape, but she could feel the rage rolling off him in waves. He moved. Not toward her, but to the wall. He fumbled for a moment, and an oil lamp flared to life, casting a hellish, flickering glow over the room. His face was terrifying. It was not the cold mask she knew. It was alive with a savage, burning grief. His eyes were wide, fixed on the charred cradle. He wouldn't look at her. He just pointed to the door, a single, trembling, commanding finger. Seraphina backed away, stumbling over debris. I'm sorry. I didn't know." He slammed his fist against the scorched doorframe. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was the loudest sound she had ever heard him make. He still wouldn't look at her. He was shaking, his shoulders trembling. He was trapped in the memory, and she had forced the door open. She fled. She ran back to her room, slammed the door, and leaned against it, gasping for breath. She had done more than trespass. She had desecrated his tomb, and he had spoken, not to her, but at her. Get out. The aftermath of the West Wing incident was a new, deeper circle of hell. Alistair did not appear at dinner for the next 3 days. He did not leave his study. Seraphina ate alone, the silence of the great hall now filled with her guilt. She had seen the heart of his pain, and he hated her for it. She was now 5 months pregnant. The child was a definite, active presence, a small, insistent flutter beneath her ribs. It was a constant reminder of her purpose, but also of her failure. She was giving him an heir, but she had shattered his peace. She abandoned the South Nursery. She couldn't bear to go near it. The cheerful yellow paint and the wallpaper of birds now seemed like a grotesque mockery of the charred, silent room in the West Wing. Dr. Miles, her only kind visitor, came for his weekly checkup. "You seem distressed, Your Grace," he said, packing his bag. "The baby is strong, but you are pale. This house is not good for one in your condition. It's too quiet." "I am finding it difficult," Seraphina admitted. "He's still not speaking, I take it," Dr. Miles said gently. He was one of the few people who dared to speak of it. He had been the Blackwood family physician for 30 years. He had delivered Alistair. He had delivered his first son, Arthur. "He spoke to me once," Seraphina whispered. "He told me to get out." Dr. Miles sighed, looking at her with profound pity. "Your Grace, Seraphina, Alistair is not a bad man. He is a man who died, but his body did not. The fire, it wasn't just the smoke that suffocated him. It was the guilt. Guilt? Why, it was an accident, wasn't it?" The doctor hesitated, looking at the door. "People say it was a faulty flu, but Alistair, he and his wife, Isabella, they were not happy. She was a frail, nervous woman. He was demanding. They argued that night. A terrible argument. He left her, went to his study to drink. When the fire broke out, he was not himself. He tried to get to them. His hands, he gestured. The scars are still there. He got the door open, but he was too late. He blames himself. He believes if he hadn't argued with her, if he hadn't been drinking, he could have saved them." "And his voice?" "He screamed," Dr. Miles said, his own voice low. "He screamed until his throat bled. And when the screaming stopped, he simply never spoke again. It was as if he had burned his own voice out as a penance. He believes he doesn't deserve to speak. He doesn't deserve to be happy. He doesn't deserve you." The revelation settled over Seraphina. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in a cage of his own making. That evening, a strange new resolve settled in her. She was not afraid of him anymore. She was sorry for him. She went to the library, a room she had always loved, and began to search. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She just looked. She found a leather-bound book of poetry, and tucked inside was a single sheet of music. It was handwritten, the ink faded to brown. The title was simple, The Willow Lullaby. The melody was simple, sad and beautiful. She hummed it. It felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. A new purpose formed. She would not let her child be born into this silence. She went back to the South Nursery. The workmen were gone, the room half-finished. She sat in the rocking chair she had ordered, the one that matched the charred one in the West Wing, and she looked at the cheerful, painted birds. "I will not let you be sad," she whispered to the flutter in her stomach. And so, she began to sing. She sang every day. She had a soft, clear voice, and in the oppressive silence of the manor, it sounded impossibly loud. She sang the willow lullaby. She sang old folk songs her mother had taught her. She sang to the birds on the wallpaper. She sang to her unborn child, telling it about the world, about the color yellow, about the sea she missed. The staff was mystified. Mrs. Croft looked at her with disapproval, but Seraphina was the Duchess, and she was pregnant. She could not be gainsaid. One evening, Lord Julian returned. He found her in the nursery, humming as she folded small linen shirts. "Well, well," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "The silent angel has found her voice, a regular songbird." "Lord Julian," she said, not bothering to stand. "Must I have the locks changed to keep you out?" "Feisty. I like it." He sauntered into the room, his eyes scanning the bright yellow. "How cheerful. A bit desperate, isn't it? Trying to paint over the rot. This room is for my child. It has nothing to do with anything else." "Oh, but it does," he said, picking up a wooden rattle. "It has everything to do with it. You're building a new life, right on top of the old one's grave. Do you think he'll thank you for it?" He gestured down the hall. "That's his son's wing. His real son." "This child is his child," Seraphina said, her voice shaking with rage. "Is it?" Julian smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "You are a beautiful woman, Duchess, and your husband is a block of ice. Dr. Miles visits you, very frequently, a handsome, gentle man. So much kinder than my cousin, I'm sure. It must be so lonely for you." Seraphina stood up, her chair scraping. "Get out. Get out of this room." "I'm just saying," Julian held up his hands. "An heir must be indisputable, and a child born from a silent, grieving husband and a singing, lonely wife. It raises questions I might be forced to ask as the next in line. You are threatening me. I am protecting my family's legacy. Be careful, Seraphina. The walls in this house don't just have ears. They have ghosts." He bowed and left her, his polished boots clicking on the floorboards. Seraphina sank back into the chair, her blood running cold. He was trying to poison Alistair against her, to suggest the child wasn't his. In a normal marriage, such an accusation would be laughed away. But in hers? A marriage with no communication, no trust, no love. Alistair hadn't touched her since that first, terrible night. He hadn't looked at her. The flutter in her stomach suddenly felt like a flutter of panic. Julian's poison was potent. How could Alistair possibly know this child was his? He only had her word. And her word, to him, meant nothing. That night, she didn't sing. She sat in the dark nursery, the silence pressing in on her again, more frightening than ever. The small, happy room now felt like a stage, and she was an actress in a play written by a madman. The seeds of doubt, once planted by Julian, took root in the fertile ground of Blackwood silence. Seraphina became painfully aware of how her interactions with Dr. Miles might look. The doctor, sensing her distress after Julian's visit, had become even more solicitous. He would bring her small gifts, a posy of wildflowers from the meadow, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. They were gestures of simple, paternal kindness, but in the suspicious, quiet halls of the manor, they looked like secrets. Seraphina saw the way Mrs. Croft's eyes lingered on the doctor's carriage when it arrived, and the tight, disapproving line of her mouth when she saw them speaking in the drawing-room. The housekeeper was not a malicious woman, but she was fiercely loyal to the Blackwood legacy and to the memory of the first Duchess. Seraphina, the new, singing Duchess, was an interloper. Julian, meanwhile, became a more frequent visitor, He no longer asked for money. Instead, he came under the guise of supporting his cousin. He would sit with Alistair in the study, drinking the Duke's brandy, filling the silence with a steady stream of cheerful, venomous gossip. Seraphina, passing the open door, would hear snippets. And the talk in London, Alistair, is all about you. They're calling her the Temere. They say she's done the impossible. Of course, a pause. They also say she's found comforts in the countryside. The good doctor is seen as quite the hero. Alistair's response was, as always, silence. But it was a different kind of silence. It was taut, simmering. Seraphina could feel the change in the atmosphere. The air in the manor became heavy, charged with unspoken suspicion. One afternoon, Seraphina was in the garden, trying to find a moment of peace. She was 7 months along, and the baby was a constant, rolling presence. Dr. Miles had stopped by. He met her on the path, holding out a small, woven basket. "I had my cook bake some honey cakes, Your Grace," he said, smiling. "They are a weakness of mine, and I thought you and the little one might enjoy them." "Dr. Miles, you are too kind," Seraphina said, truly touched. She took the basket just as a shadow fell over them. Alistair was standing on the terrace, watching them. Dr. Miles, unaware, continued, "You must keep your spirits up, Your Grace. The next few months are the most trying, but you are strong. You are bringing new life to this place." He reached out and, in a perfectly innocent, fatherly gesture, patted her arm. "You are a blessing, child." Seraphina froze. She looked up at her husband. He was a statue of granite, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the doctor's hand on her arm. Dr. Miles, finally noticing the Duke, cleared his throat and stepped back. "Your Grace," he said, nodding to Alistair. "I was just checking on the Duchess. She is exemplary." Alistair did not nod. He did not move. He simply turned and went back inside. "Oh dear," Dr. Miles murmured. He does not approve of me, I fear." "He doesn't approve of anyone," Seraphina said, but her heart was hammering. Julian's poison was working. Alistair was watching her. He was suspicious. The final, devastating blow came a week later. Seraphina had been plagued by headaches. Dr. Miles had left her a small bottle of laudanum, strictly for emergencies, with a precise dosage written on a label. "Only if the pain is unbearable," he had warned. She kept it in her bedside drawer. That night, she heard a sound from the west wing, a crash, like something heavy falling. She sat up, her heart pounding. Was it Alistair? Was he in there, tormenting himself in the burned-out nursery? She slipped out of bed and, against her better judgment, went to investigate. She had to know if he was safe. She pushed open the warped door to the west wing. "Alistair," she whispered into the darkness. A lamp flared to life, not in the nursery, but in the adjoining room. The late Duchess Isabella's bedchamber. But it wasn't Alistair. It was Lord Julian, and he was not alone. He was with Mrs. Croft. They froze, caught in the beam of her own candlelight. Julian was holding a small, silver-backed mirror. Mrs. Croft was holding a jewellery box. "Your Grace!" Mrs. Croft gasped, dropping the box, pearls scattered across the sooty floor. "What? What are you doing?" Seraphina asked, her mind struggling to understand. Julian's face, usually so charming, was ugly with a snarl. "What does it look like? We're taking what we're owed. What I'm owed." "You're stealing?" "It's not stealing, you little fool," Julian snapped. "It's collateral. My cousin won't help me, so I'm helping myself. These trinkets belong to Isabella. She's dead. He's dead. They're just things." Mrs. Croft? Seraphina turned to the housekeeper, who was pale and trembling. You're helping him. Lord Julian, he knows things about me, Mrs. Croft stammered. From my past. He forced me. She's a willing partner, Julian sneered. She hates you. She hates that you're here, painting over Isabella's memory with your bastard. It is not a bastard, Seraphina cried, stepping forward. Isn't it? Julian said, his eyes glittering. It's also perfect. The lonely wife, the attentive doctor. Why, I even found this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small bottle of laudanum from her bedside table. You were in my room, Seraphina whispered, horrified. Of course. And look, he held it up to the light. The good doctor's prescription. So intimate, so caring. And look at the dosage he's prescribed. It's rather high, isn't it? Almost dangerously high. Enough, perhaps, to make a grieving husband sleep. Permanently. The implication hit Seraphina like a physical blow. No. It's the perfect story. Julian laughed, advancing on her. The adulterous wife and her lover, the doctor, poisoning the poor, mute duke to take his fortune. It's tragic. It's believable. And with you and your child out of the way, the estate reverts to me. You're insane, Seraphina said, backing away. Am I? He lunged, grabbing her arm. You shouldn't have come in here, Duchess. You've ruined the surprise. Let go of me. She struggled, but he was strong. He shoved her back, and she stumbled, her back hitting the charred wall. Mrs. Croft, grab her, Julian commanded. But the housekeeper was frozen, her face a mask of terror. No, my lord, not this, not murder. Don't be a fool, woman. No! Seraphina screamed, shoving past him and running for the door. She burst out into the hallway, running as fast as her heavy body would allow. Alistair! She didn't know if he could hear, or if he would even care. She just ran. She heard Julian thundering after her. Get back here, you witch! She reached the main staircase, her breath sobbing in her chest. She looked down the hall, toward the south nursery, her room, her safe place. She ran for it. She burst through the door, slamming it shut and fumbling for the lock. It clicked just as Julian's body slammed against the other side. Open this door, Seraphina! He roared, rattling the handle. She backed away, trembling, her hands on her stomach. She was trapped in the bright, cheerful room, with a madman on the other side. He can't hear you, you know. Julian's voice was muffled, but clear through the thick oak door. He was pounding on it with his fist, the rhythmic thudding like a drumbeat of doom. My cousin is locked in his own head, Duchess. He's not coming to save you. No one is. Seraphina backed away until her legs hit the rocking chair. She sank into it, her body trembling so violently she thought she might break. The room, her sanctuary, was now her cage. The painted birds on the wall seemed to mock her, their cheerful, silent flight a stark contrast to her reality. I know what you're doing, Julian, she yelled, her voice hoarse with terror. You won't get away with this, won't I? He laughed, a chilling sound. Mrs. Croft is already on her way to the village to fetch the constable. She's going to tell him she caught you and the good doctor plotting. She'll tell him you tried to poison the Duke, and when she confronted you, you tried to kill her. It's your word against a loyal servant of 30 years. The laudanum, the arguments, the whispers. It was all a tapestry of lies, and she was the one caught in it. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was going to lose everything. Her home, her name, her child. They would take her baby from her. No, she whispered. Her hand went to her stomach, where the baby was kicking, a frantic, distressed rhythm that mirrored her own heart. No, I won't let you. She had to calm down. She had to think. The terror was bad for the child. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound of Julian's pounding. She needed to find a center. She needed to breathe. What did she do to calm herself? She sang. It was an absurd, insane impulse. Her life was falling apart, and she wanted to sing. But it was the only weapon she had. It was for her child. "He's getting the axe from the woodshed, Duchess," Julian called out. "This door won't hold him forever." She ignored him. She closed her eyes, and with a trembling, broken voice, she began to sing. She sang the only song that came to mind, the simple, sad melody she had found in the library. The willow lullaby. "Hush, my sweet, and close your eyes. The moon is high in silver skies. Let the willow branches weave a dream of all that you'll receive." Her voice was weak at first, cracking with fear. But as she sang, she focused on the small life inside her. She wasn't singing to defy Julian. She was singing to soothe her baby. "Singing, you're singing." Julian's voice was incredulous. "You're mad, utterly mad." She sang louder. Her voice gained strength, filling the small room. It was an act of defiance, not against Julian, but against the silence, the fear, the coldness of the house. "Sleep, my love, and have no fear, for I am watching. I am here." She poured all her love, all her fear, and all her desperate hope into the melody. She sang for the child who had no one else. She sang for herself, a woman who had been bartered and forgotten. She sang, and for a few moments the sound of the pounding faded. Down the hall, in his study, Alistair was staring into a dead fireplace. He had heard the scream. Seraphina. He had heard the running. He had heard his cousin's roar. He had done nothing. He sat, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair, a prisoner of his own paralysis. Julian's words had been eating at him for weeks. The doctor. So attentive. "Is it yours?" He had seen them. In the garden, the doctor's hand on her arm, her smile, a smile she never gave him. She was in the south nursery, the one she had built, the one that mocked the grave of his son. She was probably cowering, waiting for Julian to break in. It was what she deserved. She was a liar, an adulteress, like Isabella. No, Isabella hadn't been an adulteress. She had just been unhappy. An unhappiness he had caused. He was doing it again. He was sitting in a chair, shrouded in drink and self-pity, while a woman was in danger. A sound reached him. Faint at first. A voice. Her voice. She was singing. He stood, his heart lurching. The audacity. She was being threatened, and she was singing. He moved to the door, intending to... What? To lock it? To let Julian have her? And then he heard the melody. He froze. His blood turned to ice. It wasn't possible. He knew that song. It was not a song from a book. It was his mother's song. The lullaby she had sung to him. The lullaby he had sung to his son, Arthur, the night of the fire. He hadn't heard it in 5 years. He had thought it was buried, burned to ash with the rest of his life. He began to walk, not run. He walked, drawn by the sound as if by a rope. He moved down the hall, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. How did she know it? He reached the end of the hall. He could hear Julian, still pounding, but the sound was distant. All he could hear was the song. The world is harsh, but you will find that love is strong and fate is kind. He stood outside the nursery door, hidden in the shadows, listening. She was singing to their child. The lie crumbled. The poison drained away. Julian's accusations, Mrs. Croft's suspicions, his own black, jealous heart, they all shriveled in the face of that sound. No woman sings her lover's song to another man's child. She was singing his song, his mother's song, a song she could not possibly know. It was a miracle, a sign. She was singing it to his child, his. He saw the axe marks in the door. He saw his cousin, red-faced, raising the axe for another blow. A rage, cleaner and hotter than any grief, surged through him. It was the rage of a protector, a husband, a father. Julian swung the axe. A hand, scarred from old burns, clamped down on his wrist like a man-trap. The axe stopped, inches from the wood. Julian grunted, surprised. He turned. Alistair was standing right behind him. His face was no longer a mask. It was the face of a wrathful god. "Cousin!" Julian laughed nervously, trying to wrench his arm free. Alistair's grip was iron. "Good, you're here. The witch has locked herself in. She and the doctor, they tried to—" The music stopped. The silence from inside the room was absolute. Alistair opened his mouth. He hadn't used his voice in 5 years. He expected a rasp, a croak. A word tore from his throat, clear and powerful, echoing in the hall like a cannon shot. "Mine!" Julian froze. His arm went limp, the axe clattering from his grasp to the wooden floor. He stared at Alistair, his mouth open, his skin a pasty, sick white. What did you say?" Inside the nursery, Seraphina was pressed against the far wall, her hand over her mouth. She had heard it. It wasn't a rasp. It wasn't the "get out" from the West Wing. It was a voice, a deep, resonant baritone. "I said," Alistair repeated, his voice raw but steady, "she is mine. The child is mine, and you will not touch her." He shoved Julian. It wasn't a gentleman's push. It was a violent, brutal shove that sent his cousin staggering back against the opposite wall. "Alistair, you're speaking," Julian stammered, his bravado gone, replaced by a snake's cunning fear. You're well. This is wonderful." "You came into my home," Alistair said, each word sounding strange and new to his own ears. He advanced on Julian. "You lied to me. You tried to poison me against my wife." "No, Alistair, it was her, the laudanum, the doctor." "I know what you did." Alistair's voice dropped to a terrifying growl. "I know about your debts. I know about the jewellery." He nodded toward the West Wing. "Mrs. Croft has already confessed. She's waiting in the library." Julian's eyes darted toward the stairs. He was trapped. Alistair looked at the man who had been his blood, his family, and felt nothing but cold contempt. He had allowed this viper to hiss in his ear, to nearly cost him. He turned his back on Julian. He faced the nursery door. The axe marks scarred the wood. "Seraphina." It was the first time he had ever said her name. He heard a sob from the other side of the door. "Seraphina, open the door. You are safe." There was a fumbling sound, the click of the lock. The door opened a crack. She peered out at him. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. Her eyes were wide, not with fear of him, but with a profound, earth-shattering shock. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Not as a bargain, not as a vessel, not as a replacement. He saw the woman who had lived in his house of mourning, who had endured his coldness, and who had, in the face of terror, sung a song of life. She stepped out into the hall, her hand still on her stomach. He wanted to say 1,000 things. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Forgive me." "How do you know that song?" He could only manage 2 words. "He hurt you?" She shook her head, her eyes never leaving his face. "No, I heard you." Behind them, Julian saw his chance. His eyes were wild. He saw the axe on the floor. He lunged for it. "Alistair!" Seraphina screamed. Alistair didn't even turn. As Julian snatched the axe and swung it, Alistair caught his wrist again, twisted it, and slammed his cousin's face into the wall. Julian cried out in pain and crumpled to the floor, his nose broken. Alistair stood over him, breathing heavily. The old, familiar violence of a man who had not always been a recluse. He kicked the axe away. He looked at Seraphina, who was watching him with a mixture of terror and awe. "It is done," Alistair said. The words felt heavy, clumsy on his tongue. He felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of dizziness. The silence had been his shield. Now his voice was out, and with it came every emotion he had suppressed for 5 years. The grief, the guilt, the rage, and something new, something bright and terrifying. He leaned against the wall, his hand going to his head. "Alistair?" Seraphina stepped toward him, her fear for herself forgotten. Are you all right?" He looked at her, his eyes, those storm-grey eyes, suddenly vulnerable. "The song," he rasped, his throat aching. "Where did you learn that song?" From the library," she said, confused. "It was on a sheet of parchment. The Willow Lullaby. I liked it." He stared at her. "My mother. She wrote it. For me. I sang it to Arthur." The dam broke. The grief he had held in silence came rushing out. He didn't make a sound, but his body was racked with a shuddering sob. He slid down the wall, his head in his hands. The strong, terrifying Duke was gone, replaced by the broken man from the study. Seraphina, seeing this, didn't hesitate. The pity Dr. Miles had spoken of, the understanding of his pain, it all flooded her. She was not the Duchess. He was not the Duke. They were just two broken people in a dark hallway. She knelt in front of him, her own fear forgotten. She, in her 8th month of pregnancy, knelt on the cold floor. She reached out, and tentatively, she touched his hand. His scarred, burned hand. "Alistair," she said, her voice soft. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. He slowly raised his head. His face was a ruin of pain. I let them die," he whispered, the confession tearing from him. "It was my fault. The argument, I was drunk. I heard Isabella scream, but I couldn't. I was too late." "It was not your fault," Seraphina said, her voice firm. "A faulty flu. Dr. Miles told me. It was an accident. You are not a god, Alistair. You are just a man." I vowed," he said. "I would never speak again. A penance. My voice. It was the last thing she heard. In anger. I didn't deserve to speak to you." "And you don't deserve to be silent," she said, her grip on his hand tightening. "You have served your penance, Alistair. 5 years is long enough." He looked at her hand on his. He looked at her stomach, where their child was resting, safe. He had spoken to defend her. He had broken his vow. And the world hadn't ended. The ghosts hadn't come to claim him. He felt a strange, impossible lightness. "Seraphina," he said again, the name easier this time. He raised his other hand, the one that had brushed her cheek on their wedding night, and he cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear. I am sorry," he whispered. "I know," she whispered back. They stayed there for a long moment, kneeling on the floor amidst the wreckage of the past, Julian groaning on the floor, the nursery door scarred. And for the first time, the silence between them was not empty. It was full. The scandal that erupted from Blackwood Manor was contained, but brutal. Lord Julian was handed over to the authorities, not for attempted murder. Alistair and Seraphina agreed that the ensuing trial would be too much for the new foundations of their marriage, but for theft. Mrs. Croft, giving a full, tearful confession of Julian's blackmail regarding her own past, a youthful indiscretion of theft, provided the evidence of the stolen jewelry. Julian was disinherited and transported. His name was struck from the Blackwood line. Mrs. Croft, surprisingly, was not dismissed. Seraphina, in an act of grace that cemented her new authority as Duchess, requested she stay on. She was blackmailed, Alistair, she had said. She made a mistake, but her loyalty to this house is true. Alistair, his voice still hesitant, but growing stronger every day, had agreed. The silence in the manor was broken. It was strange. Alistair's voice was a revelation. He spoke slowly, as if rediscovering the shape of each word. At first, he would only speak a few words at a time. "Good morning." "Thank you." "Are you well?" But Seraphina, no longer the timid bride, would not let him retreat. She engaged him. She asked him questions. She read to him. And he began to talk. He told her about his first wife, Isabella. Not the idealized ghost, but the real woman. A woman who was terrified of the title, who hadn't wanted a child, who had been desperately, clinically unhappy. "I thought I could command her to be happy," Alistair confessed one evening, as they sat together in the drawing room. I was a bully. I thought strength was control." "And now?" Seraphina asked gently, her hand resting on his. He looked at her, his grey eyes clear for the first time. "Now, I think strength is listening." He began to take an interest in the south nursery. He went in alone one day, staring at the cheerful birds. He then ordered the west wing, the burned-out shell, to be unsealed, not destroyed, but cleaned, aired. He had the charred furniture removed, all except the small, soot-stained rocking horse. He brought it to the south nursery and placed it next to the new one. "The past and the future," he explained to Seraphina. Arthur, he would have liked a brother." Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, he would have." The final wall broke down a week before the child was due. Seraphina was in the nursery, organizing linens when Alistair entered. "It is time to choose a name," he said. Seraphina smiled. "I had thought, if it was a boy, perhaps Matthew." Alistair considered this. "Matthew. A good, strong name." He walked to the window, looking out at the gardens, which were, under his new orders, being restored. I would like his middle name to be Thomas, after my father." "Matthew Thomas Blackwood," Seraphina said, testing the sound. "I love it. And if it is a girl?" he asked, turning to her. "Anne," Seraphina said immediately. "After my mother." "Anne, Seraphina Blackwood," he said, and for the first time he smiled. It was a small, hesitant smile, but it transformed his severe face. It lit him from within. He stepped toward her. You saved me," he whispered. "Your song, it was like a key. You saved me, Alistair. You found your voice when I needed it most." He placed his scarred hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, hard. Alistair's eyes went wide. He laughed. It was a real, startled, joyful laugh. He is strong." "He is yours," she said, covering his hand with hers. 3 days later, Matthew Thomas Blackwood was born. It was not a silent birth. Alistair was there. He held her hand, his voice, a steady, strong presence in the room, telling her to breathe, telling her she was strong, telling her he was there. When Dr. Miles, who had been cleared of all suspicion and was now a true friend, placed the screaming, healthy baby in Seraphina's arms, Alistair was the one who spoke. "He is perfect," Alistair whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer bothered to hide. He touched his son's cheek. Seraphina was exhausted, but she had never been happier. She looked at her husband. "Sing to him, Alistair," she whispered. He looked at her, then at his son. He cleared his throat, his voice still raw with emotion. He began to sing, softly, hesitantly, the words he had not spoken in 5 years. "Hush, my sweet, and close your eyes. The moon is high in silver skies. Let the willow branches weave a dream of all that you'll receive." Seraphina closed her eyes, listening to her husband sing their son the lullaby of their family, a song of loss, and now a song of redemption. The silence of Blackwood Manor was gone. It was, at last, a home. The silence of Blackwood Manor was finally replaced by the sounds of a family. A father's voice, strong and clear, reading stories. A mother's laugh echoing in the restored gardens, and the healthy cries of their newborn son. Alistair and Seraphina proved that even the deepest wounds of the past can be healed, and that love doesn't always need words to grow, but it will always find its voice when it's needed most. Theirs was a love forged in silence, and sealed by a single, redeeming song. What did you think of Alistair's incredible transformation? Do you believe Lord Julian got the punishment he truly deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of love and redemption, please give this video a powerful like, share it with a friend who loves historical drama, and most importantly, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another one of our stories. Thank you for watching.